if we're going to have a network with a lot of capacity and essentially a lot of capital invested in channels, we need better tools. We need professional tools that are well built, well tested. So let's say we have like $2 trillion in transaction volume Lightning Network. We would need quite a lot of capacity in the network to handle that. Instead of people speculating using that to either borrow and trade with or to speculate in something else, you're actually here producing value for somebody. You're doing a service for somebody, helping them transfer money. This is a skill, right? People who are really skilled at deploying that capital. So it's like the stock market, right? Like, should I put it here? Should I put it there? Or actually, I'm producing cars. Should I spend more on this sort of production line or this, right? And so you want somebody who really knows this, because doing this yourself is most likely going to be less efficient.
Henrik Skogström is the founder of LN Capital, a company building capital management software for Lightning routing nodes. In our conversation, Henrik and I discussed the challenges that routing node operators face today, how LN Capital's first product, Torque, can alleviate some of those challenges. We discussed the addressable market for routing payments across the Lightning Network, and we discussed the skill and capital requirements needed to be a successful Lightning node operator. I've also added Henrik to today's show splits, so if you enjoy this show and if you learn something new, you can send in sats and comments and questions. Henrik and I will each get 50% of the sats, and both of us will be able to read your comments and questions. Quick shout out before we get into the episode. Today's show is sponsored by Voltage. Voltage is the industry standard and next generation provider of Lightning node infrastructure. Today's show is also sponsored by Zebedee. That's Zebedee, and Zebedee is your portal into the world of Bitcoin gaming. We'll have more from Voltage and Zebedee later in the show. Henrik, thank you for joining me today on the show. I'm excited to chat with you about routing and all the work you're doing at LN Capital and your new product, Torque. But first, how about we start with your background in Lightning, how you first came to discover it, and then why you decided to build LN Capital.
Sure, yeah. Thank you for having me. I got into Lightning while working at Arcane Crypto, where we were I was asked to check out Lightning Network, and did that in January 2019, thereabout, and sort of just fell in love with the whole system and everything there, how it, like, sort of like rediscovering programming or something like that. Through Arcane, I got into building different software for Lightning Network, where we started building a payment solution there, and through that I got a lot of experience with Lightning Network through those years, and that's how I got into Lightning, essentially.
And then now, so you decided to then go off from Arcane and build LN Capital. What was the reasoning there? What do you think was missing that you had to build?
Yeah, so I started playing around with the routing nodes, and what I essentially found is that the tools at the time weren't really doing a great job of visualizing and telling the story of what's happening with the routing node and with the node. And if we're going to have a network with a lot of capacity and essentially a lot of capital invested in channels, we need better tools. We need professional tools that are well built, well tested to analyze and essentially sort of follow the day-to-day events happening with your node, and take actions and build reports and report essentially what is happening to either yourself or the people investing in the node. So that was essentially the basic premise, where I wanted to build towards that future where there is a significantly more bigger amount of capital in the network.
Mm-hmm. And so now, so the first product you've released is called Torque, T-O-R-Q. Can you describe and maybe explain to listeners what some of the specific problems that Torque will solve for routing node operators?
Yeah, so Torque is, you can think about it a bit like Google Analytics for routing nodes. So what it does is essentially subscribe to the node's data at live. So it catches a lot of the data that LND doesn't store, which is, for example, the event like changes in channel state and routing policy, also all the HDLC updates events. So for example, if a payment failed or a route like a forwarding failed, why did it fail, or all the information related to that. It also sort of tracks a lot of the data in sort of a time series way, so it knows like when they happen and how they sort of relate to each other over time.
Right. Okay. So is Torque available for all Lightning implementations or just on LND?
Right now it's just on LND, but it's in the very near future it's going to support C Lightning as well.
Right.
So I think that's the two main implementations for now. Of course, if there's any other new major nodes coming out, then
yeah. Now for LND specifically, what types of data does LND already store, or what type of data is already accessible for a routing node operator before Torque?
What do you mean? Like
if you mentioned that there was stuff that LND was not storing that you can surface for Torque users. Without
right.
Torque, what would LND users have access to?
Well, they have access to a lot of data that is basically static. So what's the state of the channels right now? What invoices has there been? What payments has there been? What successful forwards has there been? Yeah, a bunch of stuff basically that has happened, but not the sort of not the changes to the current state as they happen. So you can't go back and see that, oh, this channel updated like that last week or an hour ago. So that's essentially the basic sort of, that's one of the things that's really built out in Torque right now. So a lot of the front end and visualizing this is not done yet, but it's coming out very soon.
Right. And so now when you think about, being the Google Analytics for routing node operators, how do you think about the size of this addressable market or the size of the opportunity?
Yeah. So right now, of course, the network has about 3,800 Bitcoins in it, which is not a lot compared to the amount of transactions volume I think we're going to see in the semi-near future. So let's say three or 4 years ahead. So I think we're going to have a much larger network of routing nodes and professional routing nodes. And these nodes will have a lot more capital invested than normal people running on a Raspberry Pi is going to have today, essentially.
Right. And so when you're thinking about your North Star metric for assessing the opportunity, are you looking at the number of Bitcoin? Is that the relevant metric for you, or is it number of users or number of institutions on Lightning? Like what's the biggest indicator for, a large market for you?
I mean, what I would consider large routing nodes. So the amount, like the number of them. It's of course a bit of an evolving way of counting what's a large routing node. But essentially, you can see that number increasing if you just take, for example, a node with more than 1 Bitcoin in capacity and more than 50 channels. You have about today like 400 nodes. And I think that number is going to increase quite a lot. And I think we're going to see like a hockey stick movement on that number as we approach like 3 and 4 years into the future.
Mm-hmm. Now, how do you then think about building a business model around, serving some of these larger nodes? Is this like a SaaS model? Is it going to be a percentage on, is there a way to get like a percentage on the volume that flows through their nodes? Would love to explore that more.
Depends a bit on how the market evolves, but you can say that there are a number of products surrounding Torque, where essentially the basic Torque implementation is open source and free for anyone to download. But of course, if you're running a business with like millions of dollars invested in Node, you might want some extra services, some extra data, some extra processing. You might also want a software service solution for one of the main tools you use to manage that routing node. Essentially, because if you're storing a large amount of data coming from these nodes, and that system is really important for operation, you want something that's super solid, that doesn't need an extra IT team to just operate that system. So of course there's an opportunity there for a software as a service model. There's also, of course, having access to capital and moving capital in and out of the network and on these kinds of services is also something that I'm now looking at building towards.
Yeah. Now, when you think about the addressable kind of the opportunity for changing the way payments work on Lightning, you think about like the types of payments that you're going to start to see on Lightning, as you mentioned, like looking out 3 or 4 years, you see this like inflection point happening. What types of payments do you think we'll be seeing in 3 or 4 years that maybe we're not seeing today?
In terms of the size of payments, or
in both. It could be a different use case. It could be an increase in the capacity or the size of payments.
Right. It's a really interesting question. It's one of those things where we can't, I think it's one of those things where we can't imagine the future, right? It might be used in a way we just can't imagine today. So we might see like a ton of tiny payments for some reason, like podcasting, similar use cases where we like pay per minute or pay per like something like that happen, or all kinds of scenarios essentially we can't imagine.
Do you have a sense for how big public capacity might be on the network into the future? I mean, that to some degree has a bounds to it, right? There's a limit on that of 21 million. But like, how do you think about what a healthy Lightning Network market looks like? Like, if we get to 10,000 Bitcoin, is that a healthy amount for a mature network to serve the world? If we get to 100,000 Bitcoin, is that an indicator of health? 1 million Bitcoin, what is that? How do you think about framing that opportunity?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think it depends on the efficiency of the capital we have invested in channels, and that of course determines the need for it. And I think this is where the fee market comes into play as well, where you can say that it's a bit hard to say right now the exact need for capacity, but I think if we're seeing a transaction volume on Lightning that's, for example, represent 15% of the transactions being done in a estimated future. So let's say we have like $2 trillion in transaction volume on Lightning Network. We would need quite a lot of capacity in the network to handle that. So I could imagine, something like 500,000 Bitcoin in capacity. But of course, it's just guessing, right? Pulling numbers.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned was efficiency. And that is kind of a key for determining how much capital should be allocated. How are routing node operators measuring their efficiency today?
So it depends. I think one measure that you can use that's really simple is essentially the turnover of your channel. So you can imagine that just having more capital in the channel, you can route bigger payments. But if you very seldomly route large payments that are larger than the available capital, and you have a channel that's quite balanced, then it's better to have that channel as small as possible, right? Because then you can have more of those channels. So that's a measure, like seeing how, like the turnover of the channel, how large is that. So you can also add that to if you have a large turnover, you will have a larger profit on the capital, which means that you can afford to take a lower fee on each transaction and still be essentially use that as a competitive advantage.
Right. And so, do you have a sense for what a healthy level of efficiency is today? Like, can we apply numbers to this for routing node operators listening to this? I know you guys have a node yourself for LN Capital. Do you have an idea for what numbers might be deemed to be efficient today in terms of like that turnover?
It's really hard to say. I don't know what other nodes experience. So yeah, not sure what you can say is a really healthy channel. But of course, you I don't know, maybe one a week, like the whole channel a week. Depends entirely on your node, right?
So one a week would be meaning like 1 times the public capacity of your node is being routed every week, right?
Yeah, but of course it depends entirely on your node if that's efficient or not. Some are really good at this and have a lot of traffic. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and then I guess some also have basically no fees, right? I chatted with Zero Fee Routing a while back, and I believe Zero Fee Routing has one of the like highest turnovers of any node on the network, where it's just constantly churning through Bitcoin. I guess, is that an important indicator too? Like if you have high fees, you may have a lower efficiency in that regard, but you may be earning more money.
Yeah, exactly. Like the amount of money you earn is essentially like the amount of money you transfer out or you forward outbound times your fee, right? So if you have something like Zero Fee Routing, I had a channel with him, or have a channel with him, and that channel sees like an insane turnover, right? It's used many times over, maybe a day, right? So that of course contributes to other channels where I earn more money than with Zero Fee Routing, where essentially he fuels some of the traffic. So yeah, it's all about like the amount of money transferred and the fee you can take, and maximizing sort of the trade-off between them, right? Right.
How do you think about setting fees on your node, like on the LN Capital node? What's your thought process on whether or not you should have zero fees, really high fees, somewhere in the middle? How do you think about that?
I'm actually testing different things. I've been playing around with static fee levels for some time. Also trying out sort of statically low and statically high fees, but because I'm building out Torque and focusing maximally on this, I don't have that much time to play around with this as maybe some of the other node operators out there. But yeah, it's something I think we'll see an evolution of as the tools get more advanced as well, and finding sort of that optimal point between the amount forwarded and the amount sort of the revenue you have on that based on the fee.
Will Torque eventually suggest things, like start to like notice changes to your node and suggest you take certain actions? Like I know that's something that every now and then on YouTube analytics, they do that when, you know, I publish a video and, oh, this video did really well, or people really like this one, they stayed around for a really long time, or this video had very low, like click-through rates. Do you think that those kind of metrics are going to be useful for Torque?
Definitely, and I think this is where, as we gather more data, we can do more of these things. I think it's definitely easier for YouTube to do something like that because they have access to everybody's data, right? That's one of their business models. So yeah, of course you can do more powerful, more advanced sort of analytics into that. But I think as the nodes grow, we can have more and more advanced version of this. But a really simple version of this is something we can build fairly soon, I think.
Mm-hmm. Will Torque also have access to all this data? Like, will you have access to all of the users' node data to kind of make these suggestions, or how does that work?
No, so the default product doesn't share data anywhere. It doesn't send data anywhere. So we're looking into having a product that does something in that direction, but it's not something we can talk about just yet.
Fair enough. That makes sense. Okay, I want to talk about One thing that I'm starting to think about a bit more when it comes to the topic of routing and earning on the Lightning Network is the transition of Bitcoin from being viewed as like this, digital gold or like digital rock that you can't really do anything with, to now potentially like a productive asset. Do you think that's realistic to have people start to frame Bitcoin in that way, that now we can look at it in a different light because you can earn on Lightning?
Definitely. And like this is becoming a situation where you can invest your money in a routing node that uses that to actually produce value for somebody else, themselves and you. I think it's very well described that you're going from sort of this valuable rock to something you can use that rock for and generate value.
Mm-hmm. And it's all happening natively on Bitcoin too, right? Like it's not like you're actually earning your rewards in Bitcoin from Bitcoin transactions. It's not like you have to send it out to some, custodian, have them loan it out to someone else, rehypothecate it, and like take on custodial risk. It's like you can hold it yourself, deploy it across the Lightning Network, and all of a sudden your money is now working for you.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah, exactly, and this is, I think, it's interesting versus these sort of yield products and yield projects essentially that we saw for some time. I think the real difference here is, instead of people speculating using that to either borrow and trade with or to speculate in something else, you're actually here producing value for somebody. You're doing a service for somebody, helping them transfer money. So this is generating real value, both in terms of utility and in rewards and sort of revenue.
What have you heard from, have you had any conversations with institutions or people that have a good amount of capital that they want to deploy? What are they most excited about, in the conversations where you've talked about Torque and how it works? What are some of the selling points that get people's attention today?
Well, most of the people I talk about outside of Bitcoin doesn't understand anything of this. It takes some time to just explain it to them. But once you get past sort of the basics and you put this in terms that they understand, because everything is basically relatable. As it's a payment network, and you need capital in order to transfer, right? Once they get to that point, it's like, oh, that's interesting. And I think later down the road, we're going to get to the point where this is going to be an investment opportunity like anything else. For example, you can move your money in and out of Bitcoin into like index funds to trade on stocks, to do different activities. And when the fee on the Lightning Network increases, the revenue for routing nodes increases, which means that you can pump in more capital to earn more money, because there is a need for more capacity in the network. So you can sort of flip back and forth, because once sort of the capacity of the network increases too much, the fee level is reduced because there's too much competition for the different routes. So in order to compete, you need to reduce the fee again. And at that point, of course, the average return of the node goes down, and then, okay, it may be more interesting to move capital out of the node into some other product or investment vehicle. So I think this is quite a bit further down the road, but I think we will see that happen in the future, where you have sort of this market that balances fee versus capacity as it is needed.
Do you have a sense for what the typical earning rate might be on Lightning today? Like, what's a typical yield that someone might be able to generate? I know the nodes, depending on the quality of your node and the size of your node, there's just a ton of factors at play here. But do you have a rough guideline for, like, if someone came to you today and said, I have 100 Bitcoin, I want to put them on the Lightning Network, how much can I earn? Like, what ballpark are you thinking of right now as like potential for earning yield today?
Yeah, that's a good question. Of course, as you said, it depends on a lot of factors, right? If you have 100 Bitcoin, you can create a large node, right? And you create sort of a gravity effect from that, as you can see with some of the other large nodes. So I think you can definitely earn more than a lot of other nodes, but it's still hard to say. Like 100 Bitcoin might be too much to deploy. But I think the return on your investment right now is not that high, because there is a lot of enthusiasts putting in money without an expectation of earning a lot, where they could put that, if they sold their Bitcoin and put it in an index fund, they would make more. So I think right now the market is a bit affected by it, because we essentially might have more capacity in the network that is needed on the most used routes, essentially. So yeah. It's of course it's hard to say, but I think it's not something that's super attractive right now.
Right. How do you think about what is too much Bitcoin to add to the network? Like you said, 100 Bitcoin might be too much today. How do you make that assessment, and like where do you think that threshold is for, efficiently deploying Bitcoin to the network? If I said I had 20 Bitcoin, would you say that's too much? Or like where's that threshold point today?
I mean, this is just sort of top of my head intuition. I don't run one of the really big nodes, so I have no idea. But I mean, you can look at the other big nodes that see a lot of traffic, and I don't think any of them have like 100 Bitcoin in capacity, unless they are like a wallet or somebody else like that. So I think that is sort of an indication. It might also just be the result of that these are individuals who have a limited amount of Bitcoin. I think there's few out there actively playing with this that have 100 Bitcoin to play around with and risk on this, right? So I think, yeah, it's hard to say again.
Right. What do you think the role of, you mentioned wallets maybe being the one entity that has, there are examples of wallets and exchanges that do have 100 Bitcoin, but there are only a few of them. What do you think the role of do you think the Lightning Network will be dominated by service providers that are, routing, but also providing a, wallet or exchange service? Or is there a space for someone to come in purely as a router with no other, sync for capital? You're not using it as an exchange, you're not using it as a wallet. It's just an entity that has built a node purely for routing. Is that realistic? Or do you think it's going to be likely that routing nodes in the future, or the successful ones, are always tied to an additional service on the network?
So if let's say you're Vault of Satoshi, essentially you're using some of your customers' Bitcoin to open channels. So you have free access to Bitcoin to invest in being a routing node as well. Of course, you have to balance that with optimizing towards having the correct amount of outbound liquidity and inbound liquidity. But yeah, it's definitely a benefit to have access to somebody else's Bitcoin free of charge to do that, right? And it might be that we get to the point where the customer is actually requiring, like, demanding some return, like a bank, right? If I put my money in a bank, I require interest on that, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think that we're just seeing the very sort of tip of that, like the very early sort of development in Lightning Network, and everything right now is like so, what's the word, like, driven by enthusiasts, naive basically, still.
I wonder if that's a growth hack for an exchange or a wallet. Like if I've got a Bitcoin exchange and I'm working on a Lightning integration, could I say, hey, every customer at the exchange, you can put up to, let's say, 1 Bitcoin, or maybe you have a threshold, maybe it's 0.1 Bitcoin. You can put 0.1 Bitcoin, dedicate it to this, Lightning node, and you're just going to earn a portion of the routing fees every single day. And you're going to you're giving basically exchange customers or wallet customers an incentive to use your exchange or wallet. And that hasn't really played out to date. Like I haven't seen any exchanges or wallets take that approach yet. But I wonder, as it gets more competitive, if you think that might be a mechanism to bootstrap more activity and get more capital and more people interested in the network.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I think we're going to see that at some point. We're going to see most of these sort of business model appears. Might be that like the normal like Bitcoiners we know today are going to be a bit wary of those products because they know that they're essentially handing their money over to a custodian like third party. Mm-hmm. But of course, it is if you need your money in some sort of custodial wallet anyway, because you want a small amount available and it doesn't matter that much to you, like having a lot of customers doing that and preferring you because they gain a little bit of money in their bank account, then yeah, I think we're going to see that. But I think also we're going to see the emergence of routing nodes that have this sort of product that you essentially deploy your money there because you don't want to operate a routing node, but you want to like have a profit split essentially with them, where they get access to capital that is a bit cheaper than other markets, and you earn profits by still holding Bitcoin in a way. And I think also we're going to see this develop in both a custodial version and a non-custodial version.
How would that work with a custodial versus non-custodial approach there?
Well, we can see products like Pool, right, where you can build that and use that as a non-custodial investment into routing nodes, right? But yeah,
I think right now on Pool though, there's only a few hundred nodes that can sell liquidity, right? Is that correct?
I'm not sure about that. I don't exactly know the limits or they have set that sort of limitations on it.
Yeah, I thought there was some if you have a certain rank on either through Terminal or through the BOZ score, you can sell liquidity. But eventually, yeah, like there are other liquidity marketplaces too. Like I think Amboss has one where anyone can sell liquidity. And I guess that would also be a non-custodial method, right?
Yeah, I think a lot today is based on you being a routing node and selling to people who need liquidity for like their shops. I think we can see that change where essentially we get the point where people can just invest in other routing nodes in various degrees of custody.
Right, okay. So in that case, I could just say, hey, Zero Fee Routing's doing really cool stuff. I don't want to compete with him. I just want to help fund him. I'll give him, a Bitcoin, and he can go deploy that and put it to use. And I know he can earn a higher yield than I could because he's got a super well-connected node, and therefore then I'm going to earn a return on that. Is that the idea?
Exactly. And this is a skill, right? People who are really skilled at deploying that capital. So it's like the stock market, right? Like, should I put it here? Should I put it there? Or actually, I'm producing cars. Should I spend more on this sort of production line or this, right? And so you want somebody who really knows this, because doing this yourself is most likely going to be less efficient than investing in somebody else, as well as the benefit of pooling your money with other people, essentially, right? So there is somewhat of a benefit of being a large routing node. So that will probably happen where you have a smaller set of really large nodes serving a lot of different markets. And I think we're going to see this sort of different level of routing nodes targeting large sort of players, and then some targeting smaller shops and all that throughout this market. I think just the market today is so it's simple in a way. I think we're going to see a much more complex market in 4 years, and especially in 8 years. It's just going to be unrecognizable from today.
That's a fascinating idea that you can invest in the skill of routing node operators. Like it's similar in a way to being able to invest in a fund. Or if I see a great investor, I can say, hey, will you take my money and just put it to work for me? But there's so many restrictions on that today. Like, for example, I can't just go to Warren Buffett and be like, hey, here, Warren, take my money and put it to work. I could through Berkshire Hathaway, But before that came to market, if I had identified Warren as a smart guy before he built it, I can't do anything about that. There's private funds today. There's hedge funds that I can't invest in directly. You either have to be like an accredited investor. You have to go through loopholes. You have to get the person to be willing to take your money, and there's restrictions around that. And it seems like this can be a much more seamless process for investing in someone's skill, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And if we can get to the point where there is less trust involved, like a lot of the regulation in the financial market today is based on the need for trust, right? To protect investors and consumers from investing in bad actors. So yeah, like we can do that today custodially, and making it at least more efficient to do non-custodial is beneficial as well. But yeah, this is exactly like this will, I think it will become like investing in a fund. And you can see that if you want to do that, if investors, professional investors especially, is going to invest in routing nodes, you need a tool, and they expect you to have a tool that lets you essentially just show them what's going on, like print a report, like yeah, you can tell them actively what's going on. And it's much harder if you're sitting there with command line and Microsoft Excel and building sort of these things through ad hoc tools. So this again is why we're building targets towards that future where there is a much more professional market.
Right. So in a way, this is almost it's like reporting software. You could almost hand this over to your, fund investors over time and be like, hey, look, here's the monthly report. Here's how much money was routed. Here's all the different updates to all the different channels, and you can kind of go as detailed as you want. And I guess it's helpful for the routing node operator, but it's also helpful for them to share in the future with anyone who is committing capital to their node.
Exactly. And so the balance there between sort of I guess you can say that there's three categories of insight and metrics you want to see. Like one is the reporting stuff that might be just required by your investors to show, or actually you just need on a monthly report to look back at, or even like for accounting. And then there is this category of quick insight where you're just checking out what's going on now, what happened yesterday, what's been happening last hour, is there any sort of warnings or something I need to address. And then there is this sort of advanced analytics where you really get into maybe pull out data, doing like machine learning, or just like more advanced analytics that you build custom for yourself. So really large funds are most likely going to do some parts of that as well. But yeah, there is a need for these kinds of tools that help you do that job, because there is a lot of work building sort of this basic stats essentially that we don't have today, and reporting tools that we don't really have today.
I hope you're enjoying the show so far. I just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Voltage. Voltage is the industry standard for Lightning Network infrastructure. Creating layer 2 applications and services on top of Bitcoin starts with Voltage, where you can spin up nodes, get access to liquidity, optimize your node, and much more. Voltage is leading the way as the next generation provider of Lightning Network infrastructure. And if you want to get a free trial and start using Voltage today, you can do so at voltage.cloud. Today, the Lightning Network, I think, is more, like, you're right when you call it a skill. I think today, like, there's definitely people who are better and worse at routing and managing their channels. I wonder, do you think it's always going to be that way, where it's always going to be like a hands-on process, very thoughtful process of like deciding, manually, like where I should devote capital? Or do you see a future where there are tools built to kind of like entirely automate this process to almost eliminate some of the skill required?
Well, I think we're going to see this process where more and more is getting automated, but not everything. I think sort of some of the competitive advantage of the more skilled routing nodes is, of course, going to be their skill, right? And of course, it's going to be other factors like the amount of capital, the price of the capital they have access to, and all this. But I think, of course, you can get to the point where shops and most sort of regular users and smaller sort of smaller shops can do this completely automated, where essentially they rely on automated deals with renting capital when they need it and all that. But for routing nodes, I think there will be a manual process to some of it, or adjusting automation tools continually and stuff like that. I don't think it's going to be for routing nodes like set and forget and just like make money out of nothing, right?
Right. So I guess there's always going to be a component. Like, what do you think the constraint is for those really great routing node operators today? What separates them from the rest? Is it like, if it's just their ability to, identify maybe like there's really high fees going on in this segment of the network and I should deploy capital there, couldn't something like that be automated away if everyone can get access to like data on the network? Couldn't you kind of like I'm trying to figure out like what specifically is it that might separate a good routing node from someone who's not good? And then what is it about technology that we can't replicate that or automate that, I guess?
Well, I think you can say that a part of this is arbitrage. So essentially, when you identify that, there's too much, like a high fee here, so it's actually profitable for me to open a channel, and I think there's going to be a lot of traffic. When you see that, you're essentially seeing an arbitrage opportunity, right? And that is essentially a skill that people can have to sort of see that today. And people do that today, where they essentially do the work. They analyze, they discover they look through nodes, they see the traffic going on their channels and where that might come from or lead to, and use that to take decisions. And that, of course, is going to be more and more complex as we go along, and more and more based on skills. And some of that is going to be automated, as you said. Like, you can have access to data that shows a lot of this. But I think the difference here, like, people can take this and think that, it's going to be like capital markets, like Forex or stocks, right? Where essentially you have this arbitrage opportunity that always goes to zero, and then you have this sort of fight to find alpha and stuff like that. The difference, one of the big differences here, is that a lot of data is not visible, and it's not an open market completely where you can see everything, right? So having local knowledge, for example, of an area or a region is a benefit, I think, and all kinds of different situations, like knowing in part of an industry that uses Lightning a lot. So I think this is not as like a competitive race to zero as a lot of capital markets and a lot of other investment markets, capital markets are like.
Right. So what might be a skill set that someone would have to make them a good candidate for operating a routing node? Like, do you think this is someone who, like, would it be like a quant at a hedge fund that is, really good with like crunching numbers and managing data that could then like analyze big portions of the network and figure out what the correct, optimal spot to deploy capital is? Or is it like, who might be a good candidate to operate a routing node?
Well, it's interesting when it comes to just the fact of sort of routing traffic without selling channels or that. Then yes, I think there's going to be like quants deciding where to open channels and all this. But I think a large portion of the revenue for routing nodes is going to come from the fact of selling channels and selling capacity. So that might change the business somewhat, where maybe some of these routing nodes focus less on sort of tuning out the little small sort of extra gain you can get from having the right channel at any given moment, and focus more on being sort of well connected, almost like a telecom provider says that, we have good coverage. So you can buy sort of liquidity from us, or telecom providers like, you can buy a cell phone subscription from us because we have good coverage, right?
Right.
And that can also be branded and like, as we sort of enter that, you get into all kinds of emotional things that humans have, like trust and reliability of that provider, and everything that isn't just purely mathematical in terms of should open channel there or there, right?
Do you think that we see logistics providers, like people who are like Amazon, who's like managing the flow of, you know, millions, probably billions of products around the world? Do you think they would be a good candidate for routing money on the network? Because they're doing that in a physical sense, right? They're just routing packages, not money.
Yeah, it's super interesting. You can almost look at this network as a bunch of cars in different cities, like a postal service, right? And then, okay, we have many cars here and trucks and everything, and if we send them there, they're over there, and they have to bring something back, or they run back empty, right? And that is an extra cost. And I think people who work in those kinds of industries could have a benefit of sort of jumping into Lightning at some point as it grows. So it's super interesting.
That would be really cool. I can only imagine if we saw, you know, if we woke up one morning and one of the largest nodes on the network was the US Postal Service or something like that. I think everyone would get a kick out of that. I want to talk a bit more about the fees on the network. What do you think? What's your assessment of like how they grow over time as more people come on the network, as there's more capital deployed? I posed this question to Renee last week, Renee Pickard, and he seemed to think that probably on balance, fees are going to rise over time on the network, but it may not be that consumers see those fees. It may be that those fees are on channel open versus being on routing payments. What's your sense for whether or not that happens, the fees on channel open or on routing, and what you kind of think of as a equilibrium fee level, or like a fee level that you think might be sustainable for the network over time?
So I think there's going to be a mix, like with everything basically in the world. There's always sort of a mix. Most things, like we're going to see a fee, I think, between a lot of the routing nodes, where they have this sort of channels between them that are, maybe some of them are based on an agreement where they have zero fee, but a lot of them have a fee. And then they have sort of this open, pay on open channels that are essentially rented or paid to shops, for example. And this creates sort of this fee market combined with the cost of capital. So when the need for capital increases and investors are coming in because the fees, let's say the need for capital increases a lot, then the fee will increase as well, because there's a lot of failed payments. So having sort of even having a channel, regardless of price, is going to be attractive to people in order to pay. And that at that point, people will put in more capital, which will balance the fee again. So sort of the entire market, the combination of this market of cost on open and cost of the routing fee is going to be balanced by the access to capital, the price of the access to the capital.
Makes sense. Okay, let's get into a bit more about the roadmap for LN Capital. I want to understand, you know, Torque's the first product you're building. What are you thinking about in the future for like extensions of Torque, or like other products in your, you know, product suite? How do you think about you know, when it's time to build a second product or a third product or a fourth, or when it's time to focus on, you know, perfecting Torque? What's your kind of strategy or game plan there?
Well, I can't go too deep into the roadmap. Essentially, just for this year, our focus is Torque, and build that into an excellent solution, like excellent capital management solution, essentially. So yeah, there are other products on the roadmap. Some of them involve connecting nodes, but I can't go more in depth into that.
Interesting. Okay. One thing I do want to talk about, though, is the liquidity on the network today. It seems like it's starting to pool in these marketplaces. You know, that's something that I've seen. We have Lightning Labs has Pool as a product. We have Amboss has Magma. We have Lightning Network Plus. We have liquidity ads on Core Lightning. There's many different marketplaces now developing for people to get and for people to buy and sell liquidity, basically, how important do you think these marketplaces are for the health of the network? And how do you see that evolving over time? Do we have many marketplaces? Does it all converge to one? Is there kind of like it seems like there's a network effect to some degree here, but it's hard to know exactly how strong that will be.
Yeah, and as I said, I think the market right now is super simple as opposed to how complex the entire Lightning market, routing node market, is going to be in the future. It's, for me, impossible to say if one of these are going to just own everything. Right now, I don't see any of them being sort of a clear candidate to just take over the market. But they are really interesting early products for sending capital to where it's needed, where there is a willingness to pay for that capital. And I think these markets will evolve into a large set of providers within that industry.
Why do you think that we haven't seen much custodial adoption in terms of these marketplaces? Like, I think all four of them are non-custodial. What do you think is holding back custodial solutions from offering, an alternative for customers? Because we see custodial exchanges became really, really popular, and today custodial exchanges are far more popular than non-custodial exchanges, in the Bitcoin space at least. What do you think is the reasoning behind why marketplaces and some of the products today in Lightning are exclusively almost non-custodial?
Well, I think it again is because we have a lot of Bitcoin enthusiasts in this industry today, which aren't interested in custodial solutions. Like, they want to preserve that non-custodial way of doing things. But yeah, I think we're going to see entirely custodial versions of this, where you have sort of agreements with, or somebody who is a really popular routing node is starting up a service where it says like, yeah, you can invest in my node. How they're doing that is I'm not sure about, but if you're doing this in your country and you're allowed to take investments like that, then yeah, you can do it. But of course, then you also suddenly enter into this space where you have regulations on who can invest in you and how and all that, because you become a custodial partner. And you're a bit different than an exchange and wallet, right? Because you're doing something else with their Bitcoin. You're not just allowing them to trade, for example.
Right. Okay. I guess, yeah, that could also lead to questions around if you're generating yield for someone in a custodial way. I believe there are some pretty stringent restrictions on that, at least in the U.S. Do you think, because I think that was something that BlockFi may have gotten into hot water about, like offering yield essentially to customers, right? I think that's maybe a good reason for why some of this stuff has not gone custodial to date.
Yeah, and I think just it's still super, super early when it comes to this market. But I think this is changing really fast. When you look at the evolution of Bitcoin, the Bitcoin market in the last 4 years, and especially the last 6 or 8 years, it's just crazy. Like, the services we have today and the level of these services, especially the custodial ones. So these problems are being solved, of course, I think in the near future.
Do you worry at all about regulations? Like, on the topic of, custodial yield on Lightning, even non-custodial yield could appear to regulators as, you're transmitting money. Like, that's essentially what you're doing as a routing node operator. You're like, you're moving capital across this network, and it's a very private network. And I can see how, maybe it's still too small for regulators to notice, but I can see how if this gets big, a regulator may come in and go, hold on, this private network, there's a bunch of people operating on it, sending money, slinging sats back and forth. We can't see any of it. They're earning for doing it, so they're providing a service which has historically been, Visa's domain or a bank's domain. regulators raise a red flag and go, hold on, this is not okay. Do you worry at all about that?
Well, yeah, I do to some degree, but at the same time, I think it goes back to the fact that these regulators are trying to prevent people from investing in bad actors. So once you have sort of custody, you have a lot of the responsibility of reporting everything and doing all that. Once, like, if you don't have custody of the funds, then I think a lot of it goes away, or essentially it isn't covered that well, I think. Also, since when you're running a routing node, yes, you're helping people transfer money, but you don't know exactly from who and to who. And you don't know, like, you have zero control of that money, right? When you do, like, it's atomic, right? So you can't take the money in the middle of that route. And that again helps reduce some of these problems. But of course, you could say that I know who I received, like the immediate right node and the immediate next left node is. And you can say that you could see a world where you have to check that route, that node is acceptable to be connected to. But again, this is a global permissionless market or network, I mean. So you can simply say that, oh, the regulation here in Norway or in the United States isn't preferable anymore. It's too much red tape. Okay, I'll just pick up the server and my company register in like Panama or whatever, right? And do it from there. It might make it harder to get access to capital that way, but you can still move around, right?
Yeah, totally. Beyond regulation, is there anything that you see as concerning in the Lightning ecosystem? Something that you wish the community would work together to solve? Any issues that you see in the network today?
Yeah, like the speed of payments and how stable and all that. But there are people working on this who knows a lot more than me, like René Picard you spoke to last week. So yeah, I don't know what, after following him, I don't want to go too deep into that. But yeah, of course, there is a ton to fix. This is super early there. We got to the point it works fairly well, but there's still a lot to do.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Okay, so maybe we can get into the last little segment here, and I want to just talk about the Lightning Network more broadly and do some like predictions and hear your thoughts on a couple items. First, I'd love to know if there's any kind of Lightning Network applications that you're using today outside of Torque that are particularly exciting. Anything interesting that you've played around with to date?
No, I mean, I mostly test out the different tools out there, like Pool, Magma that Amos just launched, and LM Plus, these things. Yeah, I bought a bunch of stuff with Bitcoin, especially now in Bitcoin 2022. But I don't use a lot of the services. I haven't used the podcasting service too much yet. I tested it out once with Breeze. I want to try it more and yeah, get that running.
Well, we'll get you set up on this show. We're gonna, before we put this out, we'll get you set up with an account, and you'll get a split from the podcasting sats. Okay, next question. When we think about Lightning payment activity today, if you had to split it up into percentages, what percent of all activity happening on the network is, like, I hesitate to say useful, but what I mean is like economic activity that people would identify as a real payment happening between two people, or a merchant and a person, or a podcast stream, versus what percentage is rebalancing or people just kind of like reconfiguring their nodes on the network. If you have to split those into percentages, how do you split them today?
Like, wild guess. I have no idea, but like 50-50 almost.
Okay.
I think there are a lot of people playing around with rebalancing. There are, I think, less now than a few months back, but people having way too aggressive rebalancing. Yeah, there's also this sort of idea that it might be like inefficient as sort of the network as a whole to rebalance too much when it's well connected. So yeah, I think we're still seeing too much rebalancing, but of course, I don't run a lot of nodes, and I don't know exactly these things.
Okay, so roughly 50-50 if you had to guess.
Yeah.
How much payment volume then do you think? If it's 50-50 split, what's the total size of that pool of volume? Again, if you have to guess on this.
Actually, I realized something. I might need to adjust it. Like we could say 25% maybe, actually, or 33%. Because if you're 50-50, it would lose a lot of money. Because the fees essentially would cancel each other out, or somebody would just lose money and somebody would make a lot of money. But yeah, so let's say 30% is rebalancing. But anyway, yeah, what was your question again?
now, if you have to take a total payment volume, like if you have to put a dollar amount to it, how much activity happened? Maybe we can say like annual dollar volume on Lightning between both rebalancing and the kind of more economically useful or traditionally useful activities.
I thought a lot about the future, but I haven't thought about the transaction volume today because it's so hard to know, right? So yeah.
Like, do you think that the average node, because we talked earlier about efficiency, and you threw out a number of maybe one times your public capacity per week might be like a rough, maybe that's a good guideline for some operators. Do you think that the network itself is circulating 1x its capacity per week? Because that could be a good way to frame it. If we have almost 4,000 Bitcoin on the network, and we have 50 weeks, or 52 weeks, but call it 50. We got 20,000 Bitcoin circulating. Is that 20? No, 200,000 Bitcoin circulating every year. If everyone as a network is circulating the entire capacity once per week, that'd be 200,000 Bitcoin per year, I believe. Do you think that is a rough, does that make sense?
Maybe. I think the total turnover of the network today is much lower than one, because it is inefficient. Some nodes have a crazy turnover rate, right? Routing many times their capacity in a year, right? But I don't know. I think it's much lower on average. And the interesting part is we get back to this sort of how much of this capital is open in the way of sort of stores renting capacity, right? Paying on channel open versus how much Bitcoin is in just channels relying on routing fees. Because they optimize differently. Like a store doesn't care if it loses a bit in efficiency because they want simplicity, maybe, right? So they pay a bit more, they have a bit more capacity than they need, because then they're sure that they have capacity when customers want to pay. So yeah, it's tricky, but I think everything comes back to the return on investment for the nodes. Yeah, sorry, I switched direction there, but essentially when it comes to total transaction volume, I think we will see in a few years a few $1 trillion in transaction volume, but right now it's much less. No idea how much.
Well, so I just did quick math on the 200,000 Bitcoin per year. If that number was true, that would mean we're at about $6 billion a year in Lightning volume, which seems a little bit on the high end. I think I've asked this question a few times to other guests, and I think the consensus seems to be somewhere between like $500 million and $2 billion, maybe. Like that's I've gotten a few different answers, and again, no one knows for sure. But
today in transaction volume?
Yeah, well, over the last 6 months, I've asked this question,
right.
So maybe it's larger today. But
yeah, it seems possible.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation. This was really useful. We went into a lot of different rabbit holes here. And I think people will get a good understanding of routing on Lightning Network from this. Where can people go to learn more about you and the work you're doing?
Yeah, ellen.capital is the website. And there also I link to the Torque GitHub repository. And there also you can find my Twitter or the Ellen Capital Twitter profile, as well as a Telegram channel, where essentially you can ask me anything, and we respond fairly quickly, I think. So I would also love to hear feedback and people trying out the solution and all that, so reach out there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time, and I'm excited to follow along with all the progress at Ellen Capital this year.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to the Lightning Round presented by Zebedee, your portal into the world of Bitcoin gaming. The Zebedee app, that is Zebedee, is a full-featured Lightning wallet and allows you to earn Bitcoin for playing games. Now, I thought it'd be fun to spice things up a bit, so if you go download the Zebedee app, you'll get a chance to compete against me and earn some extra sats. Each month, I'll be playing a different Zebedee game, and you can find them all in the Zebedee app, but this month, I'm gonna play Sarutobi. Now, my high score on Sarutobi is currently 625 meters on flyby mode, so if you go download the Zebedee app and beat my high score, send me a screenshot of it on Twitter, as well as your Zebedee gamer tag, and I'll send you some extra sats. Good luck. All right, in the last 7 days, you guys sent in 6,970 sats. It's been about 7 days since I published the last episode, so some of the comments and sats you sent in right when I published Renee's episode did not show up in the last 7 days, but regardless, we're gonna go through them in a moment. The last 7 days, the top supporters, first is BTC Rich with 1,960 sats. Follow Reason sent in 1,416 sats. An anonymous user from Breeze sent in 1,163 sats. Merlin sent in 833 sats. And I am J Miles sent in 755 sats. Again, in most cases, both parties, myself and the guest, are receiving this amount of sats, so the actual numbers are likely doubled in almost all cases, but it's not perfect. So keep that in mind when you hear these numbers. Let's go through some of the comments in the last, since the last episode was published, which was, I guess, 7 days ago, maybe 8 days ago now. First comment comes in from Jeffrey, who sent in 2,450 sats and said, "Great show." This was in response to episode 45 with Daniel Buckner, actually. The next comment from Jeffrey is, "Big fan of Renee, boosted pre-listen." That's a great signal of confidence. I appreciate the boost, Jeffrey. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Sir Brian of London from Castamatic sent in a comment that says, "Another excellent show." So thank you, Brian, for sending in 1,796 sats. And thank you for the comment. Peter says, in response to episode 46 with Renee Pickard, changing the protocol to include a reliability layer would be a game changer. I think we are still early enough to reboot the entire Lightning Network with a new protocol if it comes down to it. This is one of these conversations where I feel like I'm a little bit, I don't feel like my technical knowledge is sufficient to make a comment here. I don't know if we are early enough to reboot the entire Lightning Network if need be. I really enjoy listening to Renee and picking up on his knowledge of the space, but I definitely have to say that my technical understanding of the space is still quite limited. But regardless, Peter, thank you for sending in the comment. It's something worth thinking about, and maybe I can bring this up with a future guest, because I don't know if I'm the right person to talk about this issue. HK1111 sent in a message that says "Go" in response to Anders Helseth's episode, and sent in 10 sats. Thank you, HK1111. I am J Miles said, "Great job, Julie," in response to episode 32 with Julie Landrum on OpenNode. Sent in 245 sats. Thank you, I am J Miles. And BTC Rich sent in a comment that says, great listen in response to episode 46 with Rene Picard. I'm so impressed with Rene's fierce independence, sobering thoughts about the trend towards centralization and the implications of censorship. Thank you for the comment, BTC Rich. I'm glad you enjoyed the episode with Rene. I'd love to have him on as a guest again. It seems like people are really enjoying the content that he is bringing to the table, and it's a very valuable position for Rene to be in, because he does have this independent aspect to his work where he can sometimes say things and he can operate with clarity where others have conflicting interests sometimes. So I appreciate hearing the perspectives of independent researchers and people working on Bitcoin at a deeply technical level as well. I can't wait to see what you guys send in for comments and questions on this episode. I'll have another episode out in a couple of days. Thank you for everyone who is sending in sats and comments and questions. I really appreciate it. And I'm glad we can keep spreading this value for value movement with all the guests that come on this show. So thank you again for sending in sats, comments, questions, and I will see you all in a few days.